Part 4 Land the Landing Force. There existed at the time of Operation Buffalo a ready reserve in the form of Special Landing Force A, Col. John A. Conway, and Special Landing Force B, Col. Harry D. Wortman, of the 9th Marine Amphibious Brigade, Brig Gen. Jacob E. Glick, on Okinawa. SLF Alpha consisted of Lieutenant Col. Peter A. Wickwire's Battalion Landing Team 1-3, formerly the 1st Battalion, 3D Marines, 3D Marine Division, and LT Col. Nick J. Capetans HMM 362, a helicopter squadron, formerly, of the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing, equipped with UH-34 Seahorses, and operated from the ships of Task Group 79.4, 7th Fleet. SLF Bravo consisted of Maj Wendell O. McKittrick's HMM 363, a helicopter squadron, formerly of the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing, equipped with CH-46 Sea Knights, and operated from the ships of Task Group 79.5, 7th Fleet. Rifle battalions were assigned to the 9th MAB on a rotating basis from the 1st and 3D Marine Divisions, arriving at low ebb from the War of Attrition down south, as Vietnam was called on Okinawa, for a month plus of training on the Rock, as Okinawa was known. The troops were thus rested, re-equipped, and brought back to size with replacements. The SLFs then cruised the coast of I Corps, Republic of Vietnam, as quick reaction forces. Chapter 22 No Rest for the Weary. From the command ship of SLF Alpha, the USS Okinawa, Lieutenant Col. Peter A. Wickwire, CO, Battalion Landing Team 1-3, could see 1-9 and 3-9's agonies after sundown on 2 July 1967. The Okinawa was anchored in the South China Sea at the mouth of the Qua Viet River in preparation for Operation Bear Claw, a proposed landing in eastern Quang Tri Province. However, some 30 kilometers west of this anchorage was the marketplace, and with the Annamite Mountains forming a backdrop, there commenced a light show of mortar explosions, artillery explosions, and illumination rounds that floated down on their parachutes like distant streetlights. Whether BLT-13 proceeded as planned with Operation Bear Claw or were instead committed to Buffalo, it would be Lieutenant Colonel Wickwire's last go-around. He had only 13 days remaining on his tour. The battalion was not looking forward to his departure because Pete Wickwire had, in their eyes, the right stuff, a hell of a man, in the words of one of his Mustang platoon commanders. He was a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, class of 1951, had an extensive background in both infantry and artillery, and was a hard taskmaster. As one of his company commanders put it, you had better have had your trash together around Wickwire. He stood about 5'8", hard and athletic on his small frame, and his command presence was tremendous. He was a detail man, down to putting out the word that a Marine who removed his helmet or flak jacket, or his jungle boots after dark, could expect to lose a stripe and up to being a bear about fire control. Always calm, another of his Mustang lieutenants reckoned that the only thing that ever really worried Pete Wickwire was the men. I think he anguished over every casualty. Command of the battalion had not demanded the utmost of Wickwire during his first operation with them, Prairie, which from September 29, 1966 to January 31, 1967 saw them in the jungled mountains of Khe San. The paucity of contact was such that C Company, for example, became known as Chicken Shit Charlie, and the entire battalion could claim only 15 enemy kills during the 4 months of Operation Prairie. From February 6 to April 10, 1967, the battalion, rechristened BLT-13, trained and refurbished on Okinawa, USS Duluth, and USS Alamo, and made their first landing, Operation Union, in the Khe Sun Valley below Da Nang. Operation Beaver Cage, April 28–12 May 1967, was a complete change from the battalion's Khe San days with 55 USMC Kia, 151 USMC WA, 181 NVA/VC Kia, and 66 NVA/VC PW. There was no rest for the weary. Operation Bow Charger, 15 to 26 May 1967, placed BLT-13 against the Ben Hai River and in heavy contact as part of the 3D and 9th Marines Operation Hickory. From the DMZ, BLT-13 steamed south into the 4th Marines AO around Camp Evans and the Street Without Joy for Operations Bear Bite, 2–5 June 1967, Colgate, 7–11 June 1967, Choctaw, 12–23 June 1967, and Maryland, 23 June 2 July 1967, exhausting but comparatively fallow exercises. Battalion Landing Team 1-3 had only helicoptered back to their ships on the evening of July 2 when, at 0100, July 3, 1967, Lieutenant Colonel Wickwire was alerted for immediate deployment ashore in the 9th Marines AO. They were to join the light show to the west, and Wickwire passed on the alert to his staff officers and company commanders. Wickwire's XO was Maj Richard W. Goodale, a small, dour, balding, and heartily disliked man who, however, did BLT-13 right as an accomplished handler of administrative and logistical matters. Wickwire's S3 was Maj Richard C. Ossenfort, who was tall, smart, good-natured, and always able to keep a clear picture of the situation no matter how hot the combat. He was so unshakably calm, in fact, that he would have appeared too casually laid back to an outside observer. Internally, though, the wheel were always turning, and when they returned to the ship between operations, he would just die, as one company commander put it, he was so in need of sleep. Wickwire, Goodale, and Ossenfort had a solid group of company commanders. Captain John B. Mack of HNS Company was blonde, mustached, and intelligent, reportedly a Yale graduate, and he planned to resign his commission at the conclusion of his obligated service so as to attend Union Theological Seminary. Mack was of a different cut. The BLT's other company commanders, Captain Charles G. Jordan had a company, Captain Burrell H. Landis had B Company, Captain Gerald F. Rechek had C Company, and Captain Edward P. Aldis had D Company, were all career-minded men who were aggressive, brave, and competent. Lieutenant Colonel Wickwire told his company commanders what he had been told about the battle in the marketplace, including the misinformation that the NVA had employed tear gas and that English-speaking NVA had been on 19's radios. He further informed them that they would probably be landing at dawn to recover those casualties left behind in the marketplace. As the captains then proceeded to get their own houses in order, the ships became metal-encased beehives. SGT Kenneth P. Bouchard, Right Guide to Alpha 2, had just gotten to sleep. The enlisted men were housed below deck in multi-tiered bunks that barely allowed enough room to roll over, when the gunny woke him with, "Get the platoon ready, we're going back in." Bouchard grudgingly opened his eyes. "Jesus, we don't even have our gear. It's all down at the laundry being washed." The gunny interrupted him to explain that Bravo 19 had just been overrun, and at that point the feet of a suddenly energized Bouchard hit the tile floor. PFC Robert J. Law, the gunner of a 3.5-inch rocket team with Delta Company, was among the last to be returned to ship from their last op. He hadn't even begun the ritual of turning over ammunition, grenades, and other pyrotechnics to supply, or his deuce gear and utilities to the ship laundry. He was, in fact, just filing down the steps to join the other sardines below deck when the word came to saddle up. Jesus H. fucking Christ. Law imploded. I didn't even get to take the fucking pack off my back. His reaction was typical, as explained by LCPL Ed Kalwara, machine gun team leader assigned to Charlie 2, when you come off an operation, the ship is a wonderful sanctuary. As it normally goes, you get anywhere from 48 to 72 hours free before we go back out, so you don't rush and a lot of grab-ass goes on. But, in this particular case, we had no idea that 7 hours later they were going to be getting us up to prepare for another operation. They sounded the alarm through the ship over the PA system at 1 o'clock in the morning, and all the lights came on. Since we'd just gotten back, most people aren't in bed anyway, they're still up playing cards, they're going to stay up till 5 o'clock in the morning jawing with each other. We were not prepared for this sudden turnaround. We didn't have our clothes cleaned, we didn't have our mail read, so it just added to the terribleness of what was taking place. In officers' country, that part of each ship where the BLT's officers lived comfortably 2 or 3 to a room, each company commander conducted hasty, half-informed briefings with their need-to-know types packed into their quarters. Lieutenants and staff sergeants then passed the word on to the riflemen in platoon meetings held in supply areas or off to the side of the below-deck helicopter hangars. Before, during, and after the meetings, Marines were getting ready. For one thing, ammunition had to be issued. In the case of M16 ammo, it came as loose rounds in cardboard boxes from which magazines were then filled. PFC William V, Taylor of Charlie 2 commented on one of these nuts and bolts details that made up the big picture. "I took real good care of my stuff, but when everybody came aboard ship all this ammo was taken in and here I'm getting ammo back from someone who didn't take care of their stuff. It was all tarnished and full of crud. They wanted to use up the old, and it seemed like I was being discriminated against because I was one of the guys who didn't have a lot of time in. Shit rolls downhill. I was really pissed off because I didn't want to put this stuff in my rifle because the M16's jammed as it was, and I remember arguing and telling them I wasn't going to use this and I wanted extra ammunition on top of it. I made such a big stink out of it that they were going to have me up on office hours because I was disobeying a direct order." PFC Taylor relented, but it was an embittering reminder of the subtle division between those like himself who had come aboard on Okinawa, or after, and the contemptuous salts who'd been at Key San. Taylor got around the problem this time through the time-honored Marine Corps tradition of a midnight requisition or, more accurately, a 3 in the morning requisition. With a buddy as lookout, he stole into the supply area. The board guard had apparently drifted off, and gathered an armload of clean, boxed ammunition and what the hell sticks of C4 plastic explosives. Not all the new guys were left adrift like this. PFC Billy J. Rusty Rusmasel of HNS Company had joined the battalion on the eve of Bow Charger when he was assigned to the shore party team attached to Charlie Company. Now in the early morning prior to Bear Claw/Buffalo, he was switched to fill a radioman vacancy in the 81mm mortar platoon, HNS Company. I got with a staff sergeant named Caballero and a sergeant named Russell, and another PFC named Wolford. I'd never been in 81s before, I'd never called in a fire mission. I was real nervous. They were nervous too, but Caballero and Russell had both been there a long time, they were real professional, they were well liked, well respected. And they helped me out a bunch. Shortly after first light, Lieutenant Colonel Wickwire departed the USS Okinawa by helicopter for the 9th Marines CP at Dong Ha, and from 7:30 to 8:30, he was briefed by Colonel Giroux's people. Once firmly established ashore, BLT-13's operational control would routinely shift from the CO, SLF Alpha, to the CG, 3MAF, who in this case intended to transfer control, via the 3D Mardi IV, down to the CO, 9th Marines. At this briefing, BLT-13's mission and helicopter LZs were announced. They were to commence their helolift near the trace as of 10:30, July 3, 1967. With no time to waste, Wickwire climbed back aboard his helicopter. As BLT-13's after-action report would later record, this left the CO, BLT-13, 2 hours in which to return to the ship, estimate the situation, formulate a plan, brief unit commanders who were loaded aboard several different ships, and land the initial assault elements in the LZ. Needless to say this time frame was grossly inadequate. Aboard ship, as related by Rusmasel of the 81s, preparations continued. We didn't get any sleep that night. It was real quiet, it was real sober. Everybody that was supposed to have maps got maps and we started pinpointing it in with grease pencil we were going to land on top of them. Following breakfast in the ship's mess, they usually gave us pretty damn good meals when they were sending us out, remembered PFC Taylor. I mean they gave us like our last meal before we went out. The various units were called upstairs where they could hear the roar of the helicopters warming up. On the deck of each ship in SLF Alpha, the rifle companies of BLT-13 organized into helo teams for their Seahorses. In the 81mm mortar platoon, as PFC Rusmasel recounted, final details were tamped into place. Staff Sergeant Caballero and Sergeant Russell kept checking to make sure that we all had our equipment, and they were putting us in flights. We had another sergeant they called Sergeant Yaz, and there was another one, Sergeant Balabas, and he checked a lot. Because everyone was real tense, Balabas was coming around, talking to us and telling us it might not be as bad. It wasn't the whole 9th Marines that had been overrun, like we had first heard, it was a company and a half. He was trying to get us calm, make sure we knew what to do, that as soon as we get there we didn't panic, that we started firing just as soon as we got there. They wanted to make sure that the 81 rounds were going to be coming just as fast as they could. Like everyone else, PFC Taylor of Charlie 2 was loaded. For bear with helmet, flak jacket, automatic rifle, grenades hooked to the ammo pouches of his web belt, pack with attached entrenching tool, and, in his case, stolen ammo, pockets of mess hall apples and oranges, and his ever-present Kodak camera in hand. The sun was a fierce white glare on the hello deck of the USS Okinawa, which reverberated with its locust-like field of seahorses. In their turn, Taylor's hello team got the hand signal from the helicopter support team, and they headed for their chopper in a single-file jog, climbing one at a time through the side door. With a ferocious, jolting sound that Taylor hated, for it reminded him of how antiquated their seahorses were, the engine revved up to the right pitch, then their stomachs took the plunge as the hello lifted off the deck, leaned forward, and took off right over the front of the ship. Other helicopters followed, and after a circle or two, they began their ship-shrinking, cloud-reaching ascent. Waiting his turn, Clarley Company's CO, Captain Rechek, could look out through the hatch of his hello team shelter at the U.S. Navy ships firing their smoke-belching 6-inch guns toward the DMZ. Rechek thought of how it reminded him of the World War II documentaries he had seen, and it impressed upon him the enormity of this operation by the standards of this war. Part 5 Semper Fidelis. From the Combat After Action Report, Operation Buffalo, 021000H, 140900H, July 1967, Headquarters, Battalion Landing Team 1. 3, 9th Marine Amphibious Brigade, Mission. Commencing at El Hour on D-Day, land by heliborne assault and move abreast of the 3D Battalion, 9th Marines in support of their efforts to recover casualties previously sustained by the 1st Battalion, 9th Marines. From the Combat After Action Report, Operation Buffalo, 021000H to 140900H, July 1967, Headquarters, 3D Battalion, 9th Marines, 3D Marine Division. The NVA forces appear to be fully aware of the Marine tradition to remove all wounded and dead from the battlefield. Evacuation efforts were covered by enemy artillery, mortar, and small arms fire. From the dispatches filed by Tom Buckley of the New York Times, Con Tien, South Vietnam, July 4 pledged to recover the bodies of comrades who died in bitter fighting Sunday. 2 battalions of United States Marines pushed forward slowly today against stubborn North Vietnamese resistance less than a mile from the demilitarized zone. "We don't leave our people," said First Lieutenant Jerry Howell of Alameda, California. "I'm sure they'd do the same thing for me." The North Vietnamese held on, firing whenever the Marines tried to move forward. "Tomorrow," said Lieutenant Howell, "they would get those bodies. We're not going to leave here until we get those people out," he said, close to tears. Chapter 23. Shafted. Dawn, Monday, July 3, 1967. Corporal Power, Senior Scout, A-19, borrowed the handset from one of their radio men. He had to call his boss, Lieutenant Howell, S-2 Intelligence Officer, 19, up in the CP at Con Tien, and report that his partner Quigley was dead and that Chien was missing and presumed dead. I can't fucking stand to tell him that, Power thought. It was a disgrace not to have recovered a comrade's body, and he dreaded Howell's reaction. He never chewed you out, he'd just talk to you calmly and make you feel like a total shithead and leave it at that. We were some cocky motherfuckers, but he could handle us. Corporal Power rendered his report. Lieutenant Howell did not reproach him, but only quietly informed him that all their S-2 Scout Marines and Kit Carsons had been killed or wounded. In the span of an afternoon, the Scout section had been reduced to Lieutenant Howell, Staff Sergeant Waters, their admin NCO, and, of course, Corporal Power. Something in Power broke as he listened to Howell. Something died. 16 months with the Walking Dead, and again it seemed that everyone had been rubbed out, except him. Why had he been spared? Guilt filled him, as did something akin to self-hatred. He thought of how Garrett had leapt from their crater despite the rain of mortar rounds to help the wounded. Garrett's actions had seemed new guy dumb at the time, but now Power doubted himself. Was he, in fact, a coward in comparison? Was that why he was alone among the survivors? He looked at the dead Marines awaiting evacuation. He looked at the mounds of helmets collected from the casualties and the piled-up flak jackets, and for the first time he thought, we have lost this fucking war. This is useless, senseless shit. It had taken much to wear Corporal Power down. Under fire for the first time in the Dominican Republic, 1965, he had appreciative of the accolades showered on them for a job well done. Few such honors were rendered for their efforts in Vietnam. Here, they were ignored, even by the Marine Corps. That was how it sometimes felt, or worse, but Power armored himself against the noises of the demonstrators, et al., and soldiered on. When his tour ended, he extended because he was 20 and crazy, but also because he was from Georgia and such was the code of the South, and because he had learned a lot and thought he could keep people alive. He couldn't. No matter what they did, they lost. It was because the NVA were so ruthlessly good, but also because they were forced to fight according to such asinine rules. During Operation Hickory, the first time they had been allowed to cross that imaginary line that demarcated the southern boundary of the DMZ, he had pissed in the Ben Hai River. Power did like to do everything with a dramatic flourish. But what he really wanted to do was get across into North Vietnam. He wanted to hit them where they lived. He wanted to win. He came to realize, though, that they would never invade North Vietnam. Likewise, he used to ponder a village named Chepon which was indicated on their tactical maps west of Khe Sanh. He would have loved to have seen Chepon. It was, after all, a hub of the Ho Chi Minh Trail and major NVA supply area. But there was a line on their maps between Khe Sanh and Chepon, indicating that the latter was in Laos and, thus, immune to U.S. ground action. It was ridiculous, maddening, embittering, and on this second morning of Operation Buffalo, Power finally saw the light. If I die, it won't be for shit. He hated to believe that, because it rendered obscene the memories of those Marines he knew who had died, who had given their all for a lost cause, who had been wasted serving as bait along meaningless map lines. Such a waste, he thought. Such good men. They were some fucking men, buddy. They were for fucking real. It's just a shame that the cause isn't as real as they were. On the western flank of the general east-west line held by 3-9 above the trace, A-19, like C-19 on the eastern flank, was in reserve. The Alpha 6, Captain Slater, had been in radio contact with Major Woodring of 3-9 who had emotionally spent they would not be part of the body recovery effort. However, if 3-9 bit off more than they could chew when they moved out to recover 1-9's MIAs, Woodring told Slater he expected Alpha to be prepared to reinforce them. When Slater called up his platoon commanders, Staff Sergeants Leslie and Richardson, and SSGT Freelin Hensley in the late Lieutenant Muller's stead, he indicated that 3-9 might need them. For this reason, they would rehearse navigating forward to their adoptive battalion's positions, even at night. Shafted again, thought Gunny Santamasso, who, incidentally, had refused this morning to let their corpsman write up his Purple Heart so there would be no notification to worry his family, but the platoon commanders did speak up. The guys are a little bit uptight about still being out here. What they're saying is, my God, you know, what do we have to do to get a break? Why, can't we just get back, get a shower, and blow it off and drink? Slater, again being blamed for things beyond his control, explained Woodring's position. We aren't in the thick of it right now, and 3-9 needs some kind of reserve. The least we can do right now is talk to out people and get their health back and their attitude back, and hold what we've got. What Captain Slater did not add was that he, in fact, had divided feelings about being pulled out of the line. The one time, during his command that Alpha Company had taken a foo by RNR, he felt that between the beer, marijuana, and hell-raising, and the price gouging, demoralizing Vietnamese merchants, they had lost a lot of ground in terms of combat efficiency. Back in the bush after the RNR, everyone had moved sluggishly, everyone had been more pissed off than usual, and they had had an excessive number of heat casualties. One man from Alpha Company did, however, get out this morning on the strip. That was the sergeant from Texas who had been driven hysterical during the battle. Now recovered and ready for duty, the sergeant, who had, after all, re-upped just for this, was unwillingly directed aboard a resupply helo by Captain Slater. "Thank you very much for your being a patriot and wanting to be with us, but go back to the rear where you can be of benefit." The saturation airstrikes raging across 39's front as they saddled up were being directed from Major Woodring's CP with the help of a most unlikely source, namely, a young enlisted man who, as Captain Novedel put it, had gone UA, unauthorized absence, in the right direction. The man was with a control tower detachment of the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing at Dong Ha, and when he had seen 39 bald eagling out the day before, he had basically donned the combat gear he had been issued and never used and, without permission from anyone, fell in line with one of the helo teams. Once on the ground, he had tried to join a rifle squad, but had instead been turned over to the battalion CP. Novedel questioned him, and the young man explained, "I came in the Marine Corps to be a grunt, but I had a high GCT and they made an air traffic controller out of me. I want this." Major Woodring and Captain Novedel unofficially adopted this UA Marine and turned him over to 39's unproved invaluable. From his time as an air traffic controller, he knew the pilots by their voices and they knew him. So, he conducted the battalion's airstrikes with an ease and speed unknown to the less experienced TACP members. "It's like talking to a friend on the telephone," Novedel explained. "They can say something and it means something to you." Meanwhile, while the bombs and napalm were bursting, Novedel slung his old-fashioned Thompson and, with salt and pepper, his black radioman, and his white clerk riding shotgun, set out to check the lines. After the confusion of the previous evening, he wanted to make sure everyone understood their place in the scheme of things. I/3/9 was astride Route 561 on their right, east, flank, with L and K-19 extending the line to the left, west, and A and C-19 in reserve on the left and right flanks respectively. Despite occasional sniping and rocket-propelled grenade fire on the forward companies and intermittent shelling on everyone, almost all hands had their act together. This included, Novedel was pleased to discover, Slater's bedraggled command. Slater was a solid citizen, ready to fight, ready to do his job. As far as Novedel was concerned, though, their other attached and shot-up company had some problems. Their CO, Captain Hutchinson, was pleased with the arrival of Major Woodring, whom he considered a super guy, but was infuriated by the lack of support he'd been afforded during the battle. Hutchinson's comments then about his own battalion commander were unfair in that Woodring did not have a base to defend and was free to move with his troops. Whereas Skeening was stuck at Con Tien, but they did reflect the raging emotions of men at war. Now, with Woodring there, they're lining up the air support, the artillery, and all the things it takes to kill people which I didn't have. Woodring was on the ground with us, while our battalion commander was back in his bunker. That's son of a bitch. The whole thing was screwed up from the get-go. To get those two companies in a situation like that without a command group was screwed up, and the fact that Skeening never came out of the bunker to get out there with his battalion, to do whatever he could, tells me the guy's a goddamned coward. Buffalo is not going to shine in history as one of our most successful operations, that's for damn sure. Captain Hutchinson was very popular in Charlie Company, but Captain Novedel was outraged. I was quite upset with him because you simply don't talk down being there when you got to go on to a fight. You build your men up, you don't tear them down. He didn't want to be there. He probably saw some of what happened to Bravo, and the same thing could happen to us. Let's get out of here. We shouldn't be here. We should move back to Con Tien. I chewed his ass out on the spot in front of his platoon commanders. I made no bones about it because his kind of talk, with his leaders around him, well, that's infectious and everybody's going to feel the same way. I'll have to say he was basically spent. I expressed this to Major Woodring at the time. Meanwhile, the international press was appearing, drawn by the drama of the Marketplace massacre. Major Woodring responded thus to a request for a statement from the first dozen or so reporters who arrived. Well, get out your pencils and paper because I'm going to give you a brief statement. Now, this is my statement. What you're looking at between us is my foxhole, and when the incoming rounds come, if you get in there before I do, I'll blow you out of there. So, my first statement to you is you better dig your own foxholes. It's dangerous out here. At this time, 3-9 was holding its positions, awaiting the arrival of BLT-13 before commencing their joint northward movement, so the reporters could move rather freely along the line. Captain Giles of Kilo Company commented that the journalists in their dressed-up utilities were appalled at the shabbiness of his Marines. Their knees were coming through their utilities. Their boots, which may or may not have fit, looked as if they belonged on some bum off the street. There was a female reporter out there, and I remember her being rather surprised when some Marines came walking by in utilities where the crotch was completely ripped open, and their balls and dicks were hanging out. The female reporter was Jurate Kazikas, age 24, handsome and tall, an adventurer who'd been swept up by the war during an around-the-world trip. Miss Kazikas was a big hit among the Marines. I'd been in Vietnam for a few months, so I don't know how my judgment was, as Corporal Calopi put it. But she wasn't just Caucasian, this was a very fine-looking lady. Captain Novadell was impressed that she fixed coffee and cocoa and shared them, plus smiles and conversation, with the obviously enamored grunts around her. Novadell also commented that the NVA artillery began pounding them soon after the reporters' arrival. They thought they'd be waltzing in there and take some pictures of the dead Marines from Bravo Company, and they ended up trapped. No more helicopters were coming up because of the heavy artillery. We ended up with those folks all that night and into the next day, and they never did get their story because when we finally got some helicopters in, they wanted out. I can understand it, they weren't fighters. Those reporters never did get to see those bodies, which didn't bother me a bit. I didn't particularly care to see those poor guys flashed around. They were asking some of the dumbest questions I've ever heard in my life. Corporal Gomez listened with indignation and animosity as the reporters, the woman and 2 men, talked to his squad in their crater position. What's it like to kill somebody? Have you lost any friends? Do you believe your government's right? Like I'm really going to stop and think about this shit while I'm getting shot at. One of Gomez's men finally said, "You guys are here just for a couple hours, then you're gonna be gone, you know." What the fuck do you know? What do you care? We're the ones that have to stay here.